Have you ever seen something so wild, yet so gentle, it made you question everything you thought you knew about nature? At the edge of a snow-dusted forest, a quiet man opens his heart and his home to an unexpected visitor, a bobcat who returns each morning not to hunt, but to sit, to watch, to connect. What begins as cautious glances becomes a bond beyond species, but just when the trust is at its deepest, she vanishes. What happens next will leave you breathless. Stay with us. This story builds to a moment you will never forget. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from in the comments. If you enjoy the story, please like and follow. It helps us keep creating more. Your feedback means everything. Thank you. Every morning, as the mist curled like smoke fingers through the pine forest, it arrived. At first, Harlan Drew thought his old eyes were playing tricks on him. A shadow at the edge of the trees. Then, a shape, quiet, sure-footed, unmistakably feline. But not Tucker, not Nell, not any domestic cat. This one was larger, leaner, her fur a shifting tapestry of bronze and gray, and her eyes, they were wild, intelligent, watching. She came to the patio door just as dawn stretched gold across the frosted grass. She didn't make a sound, just placed one spotted paw on the glass and sat as if she belonged there. Tucker was the first to notice. The golden tabby scrambled across the living room rug and pressed his nose to the door, tail upright like a question mark. The wild cat didn't flinch. She merely blinked, slow and calm. Tucker let out a chirp, not a meow, but something gentler, and sat down. From the windowsill, Nell narrowed her green eyes. The black cat, sleek and elegant, tilted her head in cautious calculation. She didn't approach. She didn't flee. She simply watched. So did Harlan. From his favorite chair by the fireplace, he observed the silent ritual unfold. Every morning she returned, and every morning she sat, sometimes for minutes, sometimes for over an hour, just watching, just being. He didn't know what to make of it at first. After all, this was a bobcat, a wild animal, a predator. He had seen them in books, in documentaries, never imagined one would sit mere feet away from his cats, with only a pane of glass between them. But she never snarled, never bared teeth, never made a move that even hinted at aggression. So Harlan began to speak to her. "Good morning, miss," he'd say softly. "You're back again. I see Tucker's saved you a spot." She would blink slowly, once, twice, as if in response. Her tufted ears would angle toward his voice. Then she'd resume her stillness. The days shortened. The leaves turned to flame and drifted to earth. Harlan found himself waiting for her each morning, coffee in hand, curtains slightly parted. He began to leave the door unlatched, just in case, though he never opened it. He gave her a name. "Fern," he said one morning, his breath fogging the glass. "You look like the forest, like something it grew." Fern. It suited her. And so the days found rhythm. Fern arrived. Tucker met her at the glass. Nell remained regal and removed. Harlan watched, listened, and slowly let go of his fear. Then came the morning the cold truly bit. Fern appeared, as usual. But this time she didn't sit. She curled tightly on the doormat, tail tucked, eyes half closed. Frost laced her whiskers. Tucker pressed his paw to the glass, as if in sympathy. And Harlan Drew stood by the patio door, one hand hovering over the latch. He didn't move yet. But something inside him did. Something opened. The wind howled through the pines like a warning. A cold front had rolled in overnight, turning the forest brittle and gray. Snow didn't fall yet, but the air carried its promise. Harlan Drew sat in his chair, quilt drawn around his shoulders, a mug of chamomile tea warming his hands. The fire crackled behind him. Tucker dozed on the rug. Nell perched on the windowsill, alert as always. Then came the sound. A faint thump. Not a knock, not a scratch. Just a soft, familiar weight. The bobcat, Fern, settling on the patio mat outside the glass door. Harlan rose slowly. He knew the rhythm by now. He stepped to the glass, and there she was, curled tightly against the cold stone, her breath fogging the edge of the glass. Her eyes opened at his approach. She didn't move. "Tough morning, isn't it, girl?" he murmured. Tucker padded beside him and placed a paw on the glass again. Fern shifted only slightly, her golden eyes drifting from cat to man, then back to the snow-brushed tree line. She was thinner now, her shoulders more pronounced. The wild season had taken its toll. Harlan stood there for a long time. Something in him shifted again. He unlaced the latch. "Easy now, girl," he whispered. With a slow, almost reverent hand, he slid the patio door open just a few inches. Cold air rushed in. Nell leapt down from the sill, ears forward, body low. She slinked toward them with a mixture of curiosity and tension. Fern raised her head. Her eyes locked on the door, now open. Harlan froze. So did the cats. The bobcat didn't run. Instead, she slowly, silently, sat upright. She didn't advance, didn't retreat, just watched. Tucker, brave and ever sociable, was the first to move. He stepped across the threshold, paws touching the frosty stone of the patio. He approached Fern with measured grace. She remained still, head slightly lowered, a feline gesture of peace. They touched noses. It was brief. A sniff, a shared breath. Then Fern blinked, slow and deliberate. Nell stepped out next. She didn't rush. Her body stayed low, but she didn't hiss. She paused a few feet away, watching Tucker and Fern, then slowly closed the distance. Another touch of noses. Harlan barely breathed. No growls, no swipes, no alarm. Just stillness. The three cats, one golden and soft, one sleek and black, and one marked by wildness and winter, sat in a loose triangle on the cold stone. Harlan didn't speak. He stepped back, leaving the door open. He fetched an old woolen blanket and laid it by the fireplace, heart pounding. He didn't want to interfere, not now. This moment belonged to them. The day passed. Tucker came back in first, tail high. Nell followed after a while. Fern remained outside, on the doormat, eyes heavy with exhaustion. Night came. The fire dimmed. Snowflakes began to fall. Harlan left the door open, just an inch. He set down a second blanket, nearer the fire. Left the light low, and waited. The snow came in silence. Thick, quiet flakes drifted from the black sky and blanketed the trees in white. The forest hushed itself, as if holding its breath. Inside the stone cottage, the fire still glowed faintly, casting long, warm shadows. Harlan sat half asleep in his chair, the edge of his blanket slipping from his knee. Tucker and Nell were curled in their usual spots, one beside the hearth, the other tucked under the table. And outside, just beyond the door, Fern waited. She hadn't moved much since dusk. The bobcat was curled tightly on the doormat, her spotted coat dusted with snow, her sides rising and falling in slow rhythm. She didn't tremble. She didn't stir. But Harlan, in his half-dreaming state, felt her presence like a whisper tugging at the edges of sleep. He woke just after midnight. The fire had burned low, but a few embers still pulsed with warmth. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Rubbing his eyes, he shuffled toward the patio door. Fern was still there. But something had changed. Her eyes were closed. Her body was tighter, smaller. The curve of her back was dusted white. One paw twitched slightly in her sleep, as though chasing some dream deep in the forest. Something about the sight made Harlan's heart ache. He stepped back, reached for the old woolen blanket he had laid down earlier, and gently opened the door wider. The cold crept in, biting at his ankles. The wind shifted, and Fern stirred. Her ears flicked. Her eyes opened, golden and soft in the dim light. She didn't rise. She didn't retreat. Harlan knelt, slowly, carefully, and placed the blanket near the fire. Then he stood, backed away, and sat down in his chair again. The door remained open. The invitation had been made. Minutes passed. Then more. Tucker lifted his head. Nell blinked. And then, like a snowflake falling without sound, Fern moved. She stepped forward with incredible grace. Each paw touched the wooden floor like a ghost's whisper. She paused inside the threshold, eyes scanning the room. No one moved. No one spoke. Then she padded across the floor. She did not explore. She did not wander. She walked directly to the blanket and lowered herself onto it, body close to the fading fire. Harlan felt the breath catch in his throat. She was inside, not as an intruder, not as a threat, but as something else, something wordless and rare. Tucker rose next and trotted over, circling her once before lying down beside her. His golden fur touched hers. Nell followed, slower, more hesitant, and lay on the opposite side. Fern didn't flinch. The three cats lay in a quiet curve before the fire, wild, domestic, and everything in between. The room felt warmer somehow, quieter, fuller. Harlan didn't move for a long time. He simply watched. Outside, the snow continued to fall. Inside, something sacred had been born, a peace too fragile for words and too beautiful to question. Spring tiptoed in slowly, melting the last remnants of winter with cautious warmth. The snowbanks shrank, birds returned, the pine needles shimmered with morning dew, and in the little cottage at the edge of the woods, a subtle change filled the air. Fern was gone. Not just late, not just delayed by weather. She had stopped coming. At first, Harlan didn't worry. Wild creatures moved with seasons, after all. She might have found better shelter, followed a distant trail. He left the door ajar each evening, just in case. Tucker still sat by the glass at dawn, tail gently tapping the floor. Nell stared longer than usual into the trees, as if scanning the horizon. But days passed, then a week, then two. No paw prints, no amber eyes, no soft thump on the doormat. Harlan found himself waking earlier, peering out through the morning haze, hoping for a shape among the trees. At night, he sat by the fire with his tea growing cold, glancing toward the empty blanket near the hearth. "She's wild," he reminded himself aloud. "Not a pet, not mine." But the words rang hollow. Tucker's playful energy faded. He spent hours sitting silently at the door, occasionally letting out soft chirps, question marks in sound. Nell, more reserved, paced more often, tail twitching with a quiet frustration. Even the way she turned down her favorite treats seemed different, like mourning, though she'd never admit it. Harlan tried to distract himself, tending to the garden, patching a drafty window, dusting old books, but the silence pressed in. It wasn't the peaceful kind. It was the kind that filled spaces that had once held warmth. He walked along the edge of the woods, boots crunching the thawing earth, hoping for any sign. A broken branch, a print in the mud, anything. He saw nothing. And still, every dusk, he laid out the blanket. Every dawn, he opened the curtain. And every time, the space where Fern had once rested remained bare. He thought of her curled on the mat, the softness in her eyes, the trust it had taken to cross that threshold. He thought of the way Tucker leaned against her, of Nell's quiet acceptance, of the fire casting golden light on a trio of unlikely companions. Had she returned to her world, finally and fully? Had something happened in the wild? An injury, a fight, starvation? The questions whispered louder than the wind. Some nights he called softly into the trees. "Fern? Girl? You out there?" His voice would vanish into the dark like smoke. No reply. The spring sun rose higher in the sky. Buds burst from their branches. Wildflowers returned. But the doormat remained undisturbed. Harlan stopped trying to reassure himself. He let the ache settle in, gentle and honest. She had changed something in them all. Now her absence had a shape of its own, one that sat beside him like a fourth presence, silent and real. And still. He waited. The morning began like so many before it, quiet, gray, and ordinary. Harlan Drew stood at the kitchen sink, rinsing out his teacup. The sun peeked timidly through the thinning clouds, brushing the forest edge with soft gold. His hands moved on habit, but his eyes, as they had each day for weeks, drifted toward the tree line. Then he froze. There, between two pine trunks, a familiar shape. He blinked. Once, twice. The shape moved, graceful, low to the ground, spotted fur shimmering in the light, tufted ears, steady eyes. It was her. "Fern," he whispered, barely audible above the sound of the tap. The cup slipped from his hands and clattered harmlessly into the basin. He turned, calling out instinctively, "Tucker! Nell! She's back!" The two cats stirred from their morning naps, ears twitching at the urgency in his voice. They scrambled to the patio door, pressing their noses to the glass, tails flicking wildly. And there she was, Fern, padding toward the cottage with that same wild dignity, only not alone. Two small figures trotted close behind her, cubs, bobcat kittens, no bigger than Tucker's head. Wide-eyed and uncertain, they moved with the halting, clumsy grace of the very young. Their coats bore the same beautiful markings as their mother. Their ears twitched at every sound. They stuck close to Fern's legs, occasionally bumping into each other. Harlan's heart clenched. He fumbled with the door latch, his fingers trembling. He pulled it wide. Fern paused at the threshold. Tucker meowed with excitement. Nell sat tall, gaze sharp, but her posture calm. Fern looked up at Harlan, her amber eyes locking with his. She gave a low, throaty chuff, not a growl, not a warning, but something intimate. Then she nudged one of the cubs gently with her nose. It stepped forward, hesitantly, paws touching the stone patio. Tucker was the first to move. He padded forward, slowly, lowering his body to the ground. He extended his neck and gave the cub a gentle sniff. The kitten flinched, then leaned forward, curious. Harlan could hardly breathe. Nell, ever the queen, approached the shyer of the two. She lowered her head, blinked slowly, and touched noses with the little one. It chirped, a tiny, breathy sound, and curled against her leg. Fern watched all this silently, her gaze soft. She turned to Harlan once more and blinked. That long, deliberate blink he had come to understand as her version of speech. Trust, recognition, a kind of farewell, or perhaps a beginning. Fern led her cubs onto the patio. One curled beside Tucker, the other nestled against Nell. And slowly, Fern lowered herself beside them all, the patch of sun catching her fur just as it had months before. Harlan didn't speak. He didn't move. He simply stood in the doorway, the morning light warm on his face, his eyes wet. The doormat was no longer empty. The silence of absence had been replaced by soft paws, curious chirps, and the steady breath of something wild choosing, again, to stay. Not forever, but for now. And in that now, there was peace.